Didn't check my phone. I almost didn't hear it. It was just past 2 in the morning, and I had fallen asleep in the recliner again with the TV running, some old Western on cable, the kind I used to watch with my father. The sound of it blurred into a dream, and then my phone buzzed off the end table and hit the floor, and I woke up the way old men wake up. Slow, confused, heart already pounding before I knew why. I looked at the screen. My daughter. I picked up before the second ring. Dad. Her voice was so small I almost didn't recognize it. Not the voice of a 34-year-old woman. The voice of someone much younger. Someone scared. Dad, I need you to come, please. Sweetheart, I was already standing. My knee complained. I ignored it. What happened? Where are you? I heard something in the background. A door. A man's voice, low and sharp, saying her name like a warning. Then her voice dropped to almost nothing. I'm at the house. Don't call anyone. Just come. The line went dead. I stood there in my living room in Dayton, Ohio, in my socks and undershirt, 63 years old, and I did not think about what the right thing to do was. I did not think about the time or the distance or whether I was being reasonable. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the kitchen door and I drove. My daughter had been married for 4 years. Her husband's name was Brandon, and when she first brought him home to meet me, I tried to like him. I did. He was polished in the way that made me uneasy. The kind of polish that comes from practicing, not from character. He had a firm handshake and a way of talking about himself that sounded humble but never actually was. My daughter thought I was being overprotective. Maybe I was. She was happy, or she said she was, and I had learned a long time ago that you cannot love someone into seeing what they're not ready to see. His mother, Lorraine, was a different matter entirely. I had met her 3 times before the wedding and twice after it, and each time she made me feel like a guest in a house I hadn't been invited to, not with anything she said directly, with the way she said everything else. She had money, real money, old money, the kind that sits in real estate portfolios and family trusts in Columbus, and she wore it the way some people wear a coat, like it was the first thing she put on in the morning. Her son could do no wrong. My daughter, no matter how hard she tried, would never quite be enough. I had bitten my tongue for 4 years. I drove 40 minutes in the dark thinking about nothing but the sound of my daughter's voice on that phone call. The house was a colonial on a street in Dublin where all the houses looked like they'd been built to impress someone who would never actually visit. Lights were on downstairs. I pulled up to the curb and sat for maybe 3 seconds looking at the front door. Then I got out and walked up the path and rang the bell. Lorraine answered. She was wearing a silk robe and her hair was still set like she'd been awake and waiting. She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as prepared. It's 2:30 in the morning, she said. I know what time it is. I need to see my daughter. She's resting. Then I'll go up and check on her while she rests. I moved toward the door, and she stepped into the frame, both hands on either side of the doorway. A small woman, maybe 5'3", but she filled that space like she'd been practicing for exactly this moment. She is not leaving this house tonight, she said. Whatever she told you, she's being emotional. You coming here in the middle of the night is only going to make it worse. Ma'am, I said, and I heard my own voice like it was coming from somewhere far away. I am going to ask you one time to step aside. She didn't move. My son is handling it, she said. This is a private family matter. Private family matter. I have thought about those 3 words every day since. I looked at her standing in that doorway and I thought about my daughter's voice on the phone. That small, frightened voice. I need you to come. Don't call anyone. I put my hand on the door frame and I said, she is my family. And I walked in. Lorraine stumbled back and started saying something about trespassing, about calling the police, about how I had no idea who I was dealing with. I wasn't listening. I was already at the stairs calling my daughter's name. I heard her before I saw her. A sound from the hallway above. A door. Then footsteps. Then her face appeared at the top of the stairs, and the sight of it stopped me cold. Her lip was split. Her left eye was swollen, half shut. She was holding her right arm against her chest in the careful, deliberate way you hold something that hurts to move. I don't remember climbing the stairs. I remember being at the bottom, and then I was at the top, and she was in my arms, and she was crying, and I held her, and I said the only thing I could think to say, which was, "I've got you, I've got you, I've got you, I've got you, I've got you." I said it probably 10 times. Brandon appeared from the bedroom at the end of the hall. He was still dressed, slacks, a button-down, like he'd been prepared for company too. He stood there looking at me, holding his wife with an expression I had never seen on a human face before. Not guilt, not shame. Calculation. "She fell," he said. I looked at him over my daughter's shoulder. "No," I said, "she didn't. This is our home. You broke in here." My daughter called me. I was working very hard to keep my voice level. Every part of me wanted to do something I couldn't take back. I had never in my life understood how a person's hands could make decisions that their brain hadn't approved yet. I understood it then. She called me because she needed help. So here I am, helping. I turned back to my daughter. "Can you walk?" She nodded. "I'm taking you to the hospital right now. Can you get your shoes?" She pulled back and looked at me, and her one good eye was searching my face, like she was making sure I was real, like she'd stopped trusting what was real. "He'll say I can't," she whispered. "He doesn't get a say." We were almost to my truck when Brandon came out the front door with Lorraine behind him and his phone to his ear. He was talking to someone. Not 911. His voice was too calm for that, too businesslike. I didn't stop walking. I got my daughter into the passenger seat, and I went around to the driver's side, and I was reaching for the door handle when 2 police cruisers turned onto the street. Not 1, 2. They had been called before I even got there. I understood that later. Lorraine had called them the moment my daughter phoned me. She'd been waiting. She'd been waiting. She'd known this was coming, and she'd set the stage, and I had walked right onto it. The officers were professional. They weren't unkind, but they separated us. My daughter in one cruiser, me against the side of my truck with a flashlight in my face, and Brandon stood on the front lawn shaking the hand of a man I would later learn was a lieutenant he'd grown up with. And Lorraine watched from the porch with her arms folded, and I felt the entire situation tilt away from me like a floor giving out. They cited me for unlawful entry. One officer, a younger man, wouldn't quite meet my eyes when he handed me the paper. I took that as a sign of something. I wasn't sure what. They took my daughter back inside. I sat in my truck at the curb for a long time after the cruisers left. I looked at the house with the lights still on behind the windows, and I thought about what my daughter's face had looked like at the top of those stairs. The careful way she was holding her arm, the way she'd asked, whispered really, "He'll say I can't." Then I took out my phone and I called the only person I knew to call at 3 in the morning. My brother-in-law Hector had been a family attorney for 26 years in Cincinnati. He was married to my late wife's sister, and he'd been a presence in my life since before my daughter was born. He answered on the second ring, which told me he'd seen my name on the screen and already knew it wasn't a social call. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Don't go back to that house," he said. "Go home. Get a couple hours sleep if you can. I'll make some calls at 8 o'clock, and I need you sharp." "She's still in there." "I know." And she has visible injuries that 2 police officers and an EMT have now seen because they had to document the scene. You didn't know that was happening while you were against your truck, but it was. That documentation belongs to us now." He paused. "This is going to move fast, but it's going to move correctly. Can you trust me on that?" I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table until the sky turned gray, and then I made coffee and I sat some more. Hector called at 8:15. By 9 o'clock, I had the name and direct number of a family law attorney in Columbus named Rita Chin, who took my call immediately and told me she had dealt with the Marsh family before. She didn't say how, and I didn't ask, and that I needed to come to her office that afternoon. What I learned over the next 72 hours I will not pretend was simple or clean. It wasn't. My daughter had been in that house 4 years, and the patterns that had developed in that marriage did not unravel in a day. There were conversations I wasn't part of. There were moments when I didn't know where she was or what she was deciding. There was a specific kind of helplessness that comes with loving an adult child. You cannot make their choices. You can only stand close enough to catch them if they fall. She called me on a Thursday afternoon from a number I didn't recognize, a friend's phone. "Dad," she said, "I need you to come get me." This time I called Hector first. I told him the address she gave me, a coffee shop in Worthington, and he told me to go and he would handle the rest. I drove to Worthington and I walked into that coffee shop, and my daughter was sitting in a corner booth with a bandage on her forearm and sunglasses on that she didn't take off when she saw me. I sat down across from her. I didn't say anything. I waited. She took the glasses off. The bruising had yellowed at the edges. It had been 5 days. I looked at her face, and I kept my expression steady because she needed steady, not my grief about what I was looking at. "I signed the paperwork this morning," she said. "Rita filed it. I don't have to go back." I nodded. She looked down at a coffee cup. "I should have called you sooner." "You called me when you could," I said. "That's all that matters." "I was afraid you'd blame yourself." I thought about that for a moment. "I probably will," I said. "That's a father thing. I'll carry it for a while. But that's mine to carry, not yours." She looked up at me. "You ready to go?" I said. She nodded. The unlawful entry citation was dismissed 6 weeks later. Rita had 3 witnesses to the documented injuries, a pattern of calls to local emergency services from that address going back 18 months, calls that had been responded to and quietly filed away, and a deposition from Brandon's former colleague that established a habit of behavior I will not detail here because my daughter asked me not to, and I am honoring that. What I will say is that Lorraine had believed, perhaps for her entire life, that enough money and enough connections could smooth over anything, that a phone call at the right moment to the right person could reshape what had actually happened into something more manageable. She had built a fortress around her son, and she had assumed that fortress was impenetrable. She had not counted on Hector. She had not counted on Rita Chen, and she had not counted on the fact that her son had underestimated his own paper trail. Brandon's business had been funded in part through a series of loans secured against properties that were still, legally, in his mother's name. When the divorce proceedings began and discovery started, a number of things came to light that had nothing to do with my daughter and everything to do with how those properties had been used as collateral. I am not an attorney, and I will not pretend to understand all of it. What I understood was that by the time it was done, Brandon and Lorraine were too occupied with their own situation to maintain any interest in making mine more difficult. The citation disappeared. My record stayed clean. My daughter lives 20 minutes from me now. She has a small house in Kettering with a garden out back that she started last spring. She grows tomatoes and peppers and some kind of herb I can never remember the name of that. She puts in everything. She has a rescue dog named Pickle who is terrified of the vacuum cleaner and who I have become unreasonably fond of. We have dinner most Sundays. Sometimes I cook, sometimes she does. We don't talk about that year very much. Occasionally, something will come up, a news story, a conversation, and she'll say something quiet and honest, and I'll say something back, and then we move on. She is in therapy. She says it helps. I believe her. I think about that night sometimes. The drive in the dark. The way her voice sounded on the phone. The way Lorraine stood in that doorway, both hands on the frame, like the force of her own certainty was enough to stop anything. It wasn't. There are things I'd do differently. I know that. If I had called 911 from my truck before I walked up that path. If I had created a record before Lorraine had the chance to create hers. The next few months might have gone differently. Faster, maybe. Cleaner. Hector told me later that we were lucky, that the officers who responded had done their jobs properly and documented what they saw, and that in other circumstances, with different people, it might not have gone our way. I have thought about that. I have thought about it a lot. What I know is this. When your child calls you in the dark, something in you moves before your mind does. Before reason, before strategy, before any of the right answers you're supposed to have. Something older than all of that just moves. I grabbed my keys and I drove. I would do it again. The tomatoes are coming in well this summer. Last Sunday she sent me home with a paper bag full of them, more than I could eat in a week. I set them on the counter and I stood in my kitchen in the late afternoon light and I looked at them for a long time. That's what I have now. Sunday dinners and a bag of tomatoes and 20 minutes between us and pickle, barking at the vacuum cleaner. It is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. I keep coming back to the tomatoes. A brown paper bag full of them, sitting on my kitchen counter in the late afternoon light. That's what I have now. That's what all of it. Every sleepless hour, every document, every phone call at the wrong end of the night, eventually became a bag of tomatoes and 20 minutes between us and Sunday dinners that run long. People want to talk about that night like it was a moment of bravery. I don't think it was. I think I was just a father who heard his daughter's voice and moved. The brave part, the part that actually required something from me, came after. Sitting at my kitchen table until dawn, trusting Hector when he told me to go home, trusting Rita when she told me the process had to move at its own pace, sitting on my hands when every instinct I had was telling me to do something louder and faster and probably worse. That's the part nobody sees, the stillness after the action. I think about Lorraine sometimes. Not with anger anymore, that burned off a long time ago. I think about what she actually believed. She believed that the structure she had built around her son was permanent, that money and connections and the right phone calls made at the right moment could rewrite what had actually happened in that house. She had spent decades learning that lesson, and she applied it without hesitation. What she hadn't accounted for was that those same tools, documentation, attorneys, process, were available to us too. She'd moved first, but we moved correctly. There's a difference. Acting fast gets you in the door. Acting with your head keeps you out of a cell and gets your daughter out of that house. I wasn't smart enough that night to know the difference. Hector was. Rita was. I was smart enough to call them, and I was stubborn enough to follow their lead even when it felt unbearably slow. That stubbornness, that refusal to quit when the thing I wanted most felt completely out of reach, is the only real thing I brought to that situation after the first hour. My daughter's in therapy now. She says it helps, and I believe her. She is doing the hard work of untangling 4 years of being told that her instincts were wrong and her perceptions were unreliable. That kind of damage doesn't repair itself overnight. It takes honesty, with yourself first, then with the people trying to help you, and it takes a willingness to sit with uncomfortable things long enough to understand them. She is doing that. I am proud of her in a way I don't have words for. What I know, looking back, is that none of the good outcomes in this story came from rage. They came from doing the right thing at the right time in the right order. They came from people who had spent years building knowledge and integrity. Hector with his 26 years of family law, Rita with her understanding of how these systems actually work and who applied that knowledge carefully when it mattered. And they came from a daughter who, in the worst moment of her life, found enough left in her to pick up a phone and call her father. That's the part I will carry forever. Not the citation that got dismissed. Not Narain's face on that porch. Not any of it. Just her voice on the phone, small and scared and still, somehow reaching out. She reached, I came. The rest we figured out together. The tomatoes are good this year. She says she's going to try squash in the fall. I told her I'd help her build the trellis.